Welcome to Everything Co-op, bringing you information on how cooperatives can help improve your quality of life. This show is being sponsored by the National Co-op Bank, NCB. The NCB is dedicated to strengthening communities nationwide for the delivery of banking and financial services for the nation's cooperatives, their members, and other socially responsible organizations. For more information on the power of community ownership, visit ncb.coop. That's ncb.coop. Now stay tuned for your host, Vernon Oakes.
Good morning, everybody. This is Vernon Oakes. Welcome to Everything Co-op. This morning, we have the absolute pleasure of having Mr. Dan Waddle on with us this morning. Good morning, Dan.
Good morning, Vernon.
And you're the Senior Vice President of the National Rural Electric Cooperative Association, known as NRECA. And you get a chance to go around the world putting in electricity in different communities. How do you like that work?
That's been my life vocation. I've been doing this with NRECA for the past 31 years, but have been working with rural communities since the late 70s.
Okay, your life's work. So I guess if it's your life work, you really enjoy it. It's something that says that you like to take engineering applications and apply it to agricultural production and biomass energy conservation. What is that?
I'm not sure which CV you're drawing from, but that's an old one. I began my career with a focus on biomass combustion, basically using refuse from agricultural products to convert to usable energy. So we don't do much of that anymore at NRECA. We typically use power generated from conventional or from renewable sources to power communities. And the technologies that we use are, I think, pretty well known by all of the listeners. We use a lot of solar these days, but we also use conventional energy resources from hydroelectric and central station power plants.
Okay. So you go around the world in these different communities and you electrify them, bring electricity. Can you give us an example of a community? What is one of the communities you've done?
Well, as we were preparing for this interview, I was thinking back on some of the more memorable projects we've done in my career. And I think the project that is most memorable was we actually financed that project almost by accident. I'd been working in Bolivia for a couple of years. This is back in the early 90s on a project that was financed by USAID, the U.S. Agency for International Development, the focus of which was to support economic development in areas of promote community expansion. At that time, there was, as you may remember, in the late 80s and early 90s, the U.S. was engaged in what we called the war on drugs, and so that Bolivia was one of the centers of coca production. The projects we were doing at that time were supposed to be in areas outside of the coca production zones. So that was our focus. And but there was this community just outside of La Paz, whose leaders would come down to our office every week. So we were working. Our central office was in La Paz. The projects we were doing were in Cochabamba, and USAID was very adamant that we should only work in Cochabamba
because there was no drugs in coca.
No, the coca production was happening in the tropical zones of Cochabamba and another part of the Yungas. So we were focused on our projects in that geographic area. But these community members would come down to our office almost every week, and they would tell us that they really wanted to work with us. This went on for a year and a half, almost 2 years.
Wow.
One day I decided, okay, let's let me explain to them why we can't work with them. And in this conversation, the leader of their group said something that was, on the one hand, very poetic, but also very heart-rending. He said that every night he and his family would look down on the lights of the city and hope that one day they could have the same service.
So
I didn't realize this community was situated right on the escarpment overlooking La Paz. Now, La Paz is a city which is built, starts at about 11,000 feet. I'm sorry, starts at 12,000 feet and goes down to about 10,000 feet on an escarpment. They were sitting on the ledge of the Altiplano looking over into the city. So to me, that was just an intolerable situation. So the next week, me and my team went up to these 16 communities situated on the escarpment, and we decided at that point to fundraise. So we worked with our sponsors in the U.S. We worked with USAID, and over the next 12 months put together a project that was built in 1993.
So let me get this straight, Dan. These communities are overlooking La Paz. La Paz has electrification. They have lights at night. So I take it before the electrification, these communities have no electricity?
They had no electricity. They were literally within eyesight of, La Paz was a city of about 1 million inhabitants, served by the power company that had been there for previous 40 years. And this was just, a very small set of communities. Probably, I think there were maybe 4,000 people and about 1,000 households, but far enough away from the existing lines that it wasn't economic for the utility to interconnect them. But, like I said, it was, for me, it was, I just couldn't see how NRECA could be in the country for the purpose of expanding electricity access and let this situation go without doing our best to provide them service. And thankfully, with a lot of goodwill from our sponsors, we were able to put together the funds and work with the local electricity corporation and to make the project happen.
No electricity means you cannot do any homework at night. There's no such thing as dishwashers or refrigerators or any of those things because you don't have electricity to run them. So it is a very rural community, agriculture based, I assume. Yes. Well,
this is an indigenous community, so they had some small businesses, but basically the form of light that they're using back in those days, this is sort of pre-solar. They were using what they call mecheros, which are little kerosene-based lamps, right? Mm-hmm. Homemade, and the light that the mechero would produce was very dim, and the lamp would put off a lot of soot. So it was unhealthy because the soot is in the inside of the house and it gets into the respiratory system. And it was you couldn't really read by it, right? It put out a very low quality light. That was all they had.
Wow.
Yeah.
So that kind of reminds me of growing up in West Virginia. We had coal that we heated the house with, and there would always be soot everywhere. Okay.
Right.
We cooked with it and we heated the house with it, but not kerosene. I guess kerosene would even be worse than the soot from coal. All right, so we got these communities. They can't read by them. It's environmentally bad for them how they're lighting, and they want the electricity. They can see it when they go to sleep at night or when they're after dinner. When they look out, they see the light from La Paz, and they want it, and they come and they tell you every week. They come and tell you.
That's right. They're very persistent. And it's, at first I have to admit, at first I was thinking, well, that's not my job. We've got to focus on what USAID has contracted us to do. But, I think that all of us have this capacity to hear when somebody says something that opens our hearts. And that ring of hope, not just for themselves, but for their children and for their neighbors, for their community members, is what really rung true to me. And I have to say that I think that was the most, that one project, it was a very small project compared to the other things that we were doing. That project had as much of an impact on me as any other project that we ever did.
You got what this leader wanted, and they were very persistent. Every week they come to your office and they say, this is what we want. You finally got it, and you were able to get some support. So that support comes in dollars, and that dollars, one of the ways is support is in dollars. So that was from USAID. You would make proposals to them?
Well, we put some of our own money in it. I think the project cost was, I think it was maybe $180,000. So we put $50,000 in from NRECA. We worked with as I said, it was a private utility. Back in those days, it was called Kobe, and we made a deal with them where they would finance the primary, the medium voltage lines, and we financed the transformers and the distribution. USAID allowed us to use our resources, our personnel. So USAID made a contribution in the form of the personnel cost for the project, the engineering cost. All of the materials, however, were financed through NRECA funds and Kobe funds. So, to me, it was, to talk about doing good works for your community. This is something that it was necessary. And, thankfully, we're able to convince our friends at Kobe to work with us and at USA to allow us to do the project.
And you said this was when was this?
1993.
1993. So you've outlined what this was like, this community was like before, with these kerosene lamps and soot and so forth, and their desire for something better for their families and their community, their children. What has this community been like after this?
Well, what I have to remind myself and our listeners is that public infrastructure, the benefits of public infrastructure often take time to take root. I'd say in the first few years after the project was completed, without question, the families received improved quality of electric service, and they had individual benefits. That I don't think that when I visited the community, I think in 1997. And then again, back in 2010, there was a big change by 2010. Now, how much of that was due to the project and how much was due to the natural process of economic development, I can't really say. The community grew. Certainly the population grew from, about 1,000 households to almost double that by 2010. I think that wouldn't have happened if they hadn't had the public services that they had. They also had schools. Go ahead.
We're going to have to take our first break. Okay. I'm going to come back and ask you to expand a little bit more on what it was like afterwards. And then I want to get into what did you do to prepare for this work? What kinds of things did you do to prepare for it? And we'll be right back. Please don't touch that dial.
WOL, where information is power.
Welcome back, everybody. This is Vernon Oakes, and the program is Everything Cooperative, and we have Mr. Dan Waddle on with us this morning. He's the Senior Vice President at NRECA, National Rural Electric Cooperative Association, and he's gone around the world, and he's helped to electrify communities, particularly in rural areas. And we were talking about Bolivia right outside of La Paz. Dan, you were talking about before we took break, that there were 1,000 households in 1993. By 2010, it was up to perhaps doubling of that, brought on by electrification, brought on by economic development. What else did you see change when you went back and visited them in 2010?
I think the big change was a vibrant school that was had the resources it needed for the children. Of course, they had a school before, but there was no lighting system in the school. There were no audiovisual aids. There weren't any of the modern modern equipment that schools need for education. And there were also many more stores. Of course, the stores were all connected to the electric service that had been established in the community. Street lights. I think one of the big things that we take for granted in the U.S. is the importance of street lights. Street lights are principally for public security. And this is extremely important in many of the countries where we work because violence against women is a very real thing. So street lights in this community, I think, were extremely important. So there's much more of a sense of vibrancy than there had been previously.
So what prepared you? What's your education background?
I have my first degrees are in agricultural engineering. My doctorate is in mechanical engineering. I prepared myself, actually. I thought that I was going to have a career in agriculture. But as I was going through my graduate studies, I fell in love with energy. And the first job I had focused on a combination of teaching and doing projects, energy projects with rural communities. This was in Kenya back in starting in 79 through 82. And I just kind of followed my interest from that point forward.
How did you get a job in Kenya?
I had lived in Ethiopia when I was a kid. My father was in the military. He's in the Army. In the U.S. used to have a base in what is now Eritrea. At that time, it was Ethiopia, and not in Addis. Anyway, because I was in Eritrea, I had an interest in returning to Africa, and one of my college professors had worked in Kenya and told me about a project there, and as I was completing my master's degree, and put me in touch with the people who were interviewing for the position. So I took a teaching position in 1979.
Teaching position, teaching agriculture engineering?
Yep, teaching agricultural engineering at it's a university called Edgerton University in Njaro. So I was teaching the individuals who were destined to become agricultural agents and designers for the agricultural industry in Kenya.
So what are some of the kind of projects that an agriculture engineer works on? I have no idea what that looks like in that space.
Right. Well, it's actually that the entire industry has shifted somewhat. When I was engaged in agricultural engineering, the agricultural engineers would design farm implements, tractors. I was interested in energy, so I worked with the agricultural system in Virginia. I went to Virginia Tech for my first 2 degrees, and worked with the poultry and dairy industry, looking at animal environment, designing with the structures and the ventilation systems they needed. That wasn't ultimately what my interest was, so I became much more interested in energy, heat transfer, and energy generation.
Fantastic. You got a chance to travel at a very young age with your father, and that's what you wanted to do. Virginia Tech from Bluefield, West Virginia, was huge. It had a tremendous reputation. I ended up going to Bluefield State College. Virginia Tech was out of my reach from a monetary standpoint. I was in 65. I was a little bit ahead of you in time wise. Never thought about agriculture. Engineering was always interesting to me, but agriculture. And then you switched from agriculture engineering, or at least you added on to that energy. How did you get interested in energy?
Well, when I was in high school, I think you probably remember we went through several energy shocks in the early 70s. My father at that time had a gas station, so we saw it firsthand with the long gas lines, and there was a lot of interest at that point in time in switching from conventional fossil fuel energy to renewables, not because of any concerns over global warming, just to have more energy independence. So when I went into university, the first few research projects I engaged in were all solar based, and or the focus was on solar thermal applications. And I realized that I had a great interest in renewables. So that's what led me to focus more on energy processes in my undergraduate and graduate studies.
All right. So how did you get to NRECA? What was that path like?
When I finished my doctorate, I went to work at Oak Ridge National Laboratory and had been managing some projects, USAID funded in Central America, where we were looking at we were developing some small hydro resources, and I came across one of NRECA's employees at the time who was working on a cooperative formation project in Costa Rica. So we decided to join resources, and we worked on a series of small hydro projects for a group of cooperatives that NRECA had been supporting. And I, saw the kind of work that NRECA was doing, and realized that it was an institution that I might want to work with.
Okay. So what was your first job at NRECA?
The project in Bolivia. I was from the experience with NRECA in Costa Rica. I was invited to or asked to design this project in Bolivia. That was a large national electrification expansion project. We ended up working in literally all over Bolivia, but the experience of helping communities in their economic development through introduction of electric service, I just realized that it was the kind of work that I really resonated with. That it was really the combination of community development and engineering applications that really spoke to me.
Okay, community development and engineering applications. How did NRECA, particularly when NRECA's National Rural Electric Cooperative Association, how did this cooperation get involved with this community development? And what did you find out about cooperatives?
Well, that's really what I understand cooperatives are all about. The cooperatives focus the resources and the energy of the community to benefit the community as a whole. And that comes in many forms. I think the most visual form is in economic prosperity. But it also comes in a form of the community realizing what it means to live as a community, to help one another. That I think it's that combination of, a practical focus on moving the community's economic development forward with this cooperative spirit that has really been my focus in the work that I've done.
Okay. Can you tell me what this cooperative spirit is? What's your experience with that?
Well, I think if you go back to the example that we started with, the advocacy of a few community members to advocate for the benefit of the entire community. Now, without question, there's personal interest involved, but it goes far beyond that. And I think that's what really struck me when I was speaking with these community members. They were speaking for themselves, but they were speaking for the entire community, and they were communicating the needs of the entire community. So that cooperative spirit, from my perception, has to do with each community member recognizing what their own needs are, but also recognizing that for them to realize those needs, they have to be able to work together.
So I have that as in the values of cooperation. The first one is self-help. So it is self-help, and I think the last one is solidarity. How do you help self and help the community all at the same time? That's the spirit you're talking about. We're going to take our second break, and we'll be right back. And then I want to talk a little bit more about co-ops, and I'm going to see if you can tell us about another community that you've worked with and see what those results are. We'll be right back. Please don't touch that dial.
1450 WOL, where information is power.
Welcome back, everybody. This is Vernon Oakes, and we've been talking this morning with Dan Waddle from National Rural Electric Cooperative Association. Dan, we will be on the air for 9 years come this October. It'll be celebrating 9 years. And in that 9 years, National Cooperative Bank has been our main supporter. NCB's mission is to support and be an advocate for America's cooperatives and their members, especially in low-income communities, by providing innovative financial and related services. Now, Dan, I find it interesting that you're an engineer, And as an engineer, I have this view of what an engineer is. I majored in math and chemistry in undergrad, and I had a slide rule and all of these kinds of things. And you're normally in front of paper figuring out stuff, how to put this project together. But yet you've been talking about opening up your heart and hope for their children in the community and a cooperative spirit. You've been talking about these touchy-feely things, okay? And it seems like that is also what has lit you up about these projects. When you talked about these folks coming down, having seen the light in La Paz and wanting it for themselves. And it kind of gets me to the ethical values of cooperation: honesty, openness, social responsibility, and caring for others. I think of it as caring for one another, like the golden rule. So can you talk some more about this? What are the kinds of experiences you've had as these heart touchy-feeling kinds of experiences, particularly with cooperation?
I'd say that probably 95% of my workday is focused on getting the job done, right? We have to be able to organize our time and marshal resources to do the things that have to be done. And a lot of that is, technical, financial content. But I think all human beings also want to, my experience is that all human beings want to make a contribution. And I think it's the small interactions that have real human content that touch us and, give us a sense of purpose and a sense of direction. So while I think that my colleagues would if you ask them what I'm like, they would probably say I'm, serious and focused and all the things you might think of as an engineer. But I'm also human. In my life experience, it's those small interactions with counterparts that can really have an impact. That certainly has been the case for me. Mostly seeing what communities need and seeing how we can apply our resources, the resources that our sponsors give to us and that NRECA gives to us, that has given me and my colleagues direction.
Fantastic. So I would like, if you would, can you give us another example somewhere around the world where you've gone in and used this 95% of your workday to provide technical and financial contributions and touch people in such a way that warms your heart and warms theirs?
Yeah, so over the years, I've had the opportunity to work on many projects. I think one of the projects that really stands out was also in Bolivia. We were working with a very large cooperative that's at that time was based in Santa Cruz. Santa Cruz is a large regional city in the eastern part of Bolivia. There was a group of communities to the north of Santa Cruz City called Chicotanilla, which I think there were there were 8 communities situated in a series of what used to be missions. These were missions that were established in the 1700s, and the towns in each of these communities had isolated generation systems that suffered from a lot of maintenance issues. The distribution systems were in very poor condition. And we had worked with our counterpart, CRE, this co-op, to evaluate the cost of integrating all of these 8 communities into a central generation station. So we did the engineering to evaluate what the cost would be for the generation and the distribution systems, and then worked with CRE in the implementation of that project. This occurred we did the engineering studies in 1995. The project was completed in 1998. And as you were asking before about the impact, I went back in 2010, and to my delight, the communities had really transformed. This happens to be in an agricultural rich area. There is so much more prosperity 10 years later than I had ever imagined. And I think it wasn't only because of the investment in the electrification system. There was also a big investment in roads. But without question, the electrification investment made a huge difference in these communities.
So when you say prosperity, is that prosperity like right now in the U.S.? You have the one percenters that get, I think, 60% of every new dollar, some huge amount, and the 99 percenters split up to 40%. Was that prosperity, to best of your knowledge, did it trickle down, or through cooperation, did it trickle up, goosh up? Did it go out to the masses of people, or was it concentrated in the hands of a few people?
Of course, I'm speaking about my impressions. We didn't do a detailed economic impact analysis, as we sometimes do. The impressions I had were based upon a field trip that I made with our cooperative partners. And what I'm speaking of is improved housing, dramatically improved infrastructure, physical infrastructure in each of the towns, better roads, better schools, again, public lighting, and just a general sense of, walking through the towns and looking at the number of new businesses, locally owned businesses that had evolved over time. A general sense of much improved or much increased prosperity at the local level. Now, without question, there's investment that came from the wealthier inhabitants in Santa Cruz who are investing in these communities. But also, without question, the community members themselves participated in the prosperity that was visually evident.
So you have education, you have street lighting, you have small businesses, you have housing, roads. You have a lot of improvement that really helps everyday person that lives in those communities.
Yes.
And then there's this sense of, you could feel it, that people feel better, that hope, that living from day to day, better optimism about life. Okay.
And of course, in our business, we also measure prosperity by how much electricity people use. Because if they can't afford the electricity, then they're not going to, the load growth doesn't continue. So what we saw in the case of these power systems is very steady and actually rapid load growth, which is a measure of the community's prosperity.
So when they're using more electricity, that one means that they can afford it, they can pay for it. Now, does this co-op that owns the electrical grid, owns the generation and distribution, my sense of co-ops is that they're trying to provide this to their members, to these households, to the ones that have the meters at the least possible cost. They're not in it to make a profit. Is that what's happening in these communities?
Yeah, cooperatives in Bolivia are all formed on a nonprofit basis. So in this case, the cooperative not only provides electricity service on a nonprofit basis, but in this case, the cooperative has invested in healthcare, in nutrition programs. It has rolled its margins that are derived from electricity sales back into the direct benefit of the communities that it serves.
So now you've gotten to, I have it that co-ops and their members, the members in the co-ops elect the board of directors, and both the members and the board decides what to do with the profits. And it can go into three spaces. One is to keep in the business to help the growth, put in more hardware or keep the hardware up to date. Second one is to provide money for the community. And that's what you've said in healthcare and nutrition and other ways they could, in schools, they could provide money for different kinds of things. And then the third thing is dividends, to give back money to their members. It's been my experience with talking to people about NRECA that a lot of the businesses, the co-ops in NRECA, both in the U.S. and overseas, they don't give back money to the members. Is that pretty much right? They just do it with lower cost of electricity?
Well, the NRECA members do provide capital credits back to their membership, usually in the form of a credit on their electricity bill, and they might do that. They may do that some years and not others. It depends upon how their performance has been. Many of the co-ops that we have established in our program, and we've established about 250 over the years. Many of the co-ops generate reasonable margins, and they have the option of either reinvesting that into growth, or to provide capital credits to their membership. So that's done on an individual basis, and it's done according to what the needs are.
Okay, so that's exciting to me because I did not know that, this capital credit. So it's like on my electric bill, what may show up one day is a credit. Not only do I get how much I owe, but it may show up one day a credit. That's phenomenal. Okay,
Yeah.
That's extremely exciting.
Well, most members like it when they get a credit, of course.
Of course. Yes, I would like it too. Okay.
Right.
And once when I lived in Prince George's County, I was served by a rural electric co-op, but I didn't know it. And that's, to me, is unfortunate with consumer co-ops. That's where the consumer owns the business. Too often, rural electric co-ops and credit unions and housing co-ops, too often the person doesn't know that they have a voice, that they have some say in operating this, and could become a board member. They have the right to run for the board. Dan, your career has just been extremely exciting all over the world. You talked about Kenya and Bolivia and 250 projects. We're going to take our final break here already, and I really come back and talk to you more about benefits of cooperation to the extent that we have. Any more that you want to add to that, but really look at future. Coming out of COVID, what are some of the things that you can see happening with NRECA and helping to put these projects, electrify these different communities around the world, and what role you see playing in all of this? We'll be right back. Please don't touch that dial.
WOL, where information is power.
Welcome back, everybody. This is Vernon Oakes, and the program is Everything Co-op. Mr. Dan Waddle, who's the senior vice president of NRECA, who goes around the world and helps to engineer and put in place electrification for communities. Dan, there's in 2021 there's 7.8 billion people on the planet, and somewhere I read in researching to talk to you that there's under 1 billion people now that don't have electrification. That's like 12-13% of the world's population. So what do you see NRECA being able to do to help bring in more electrification, or what do you see you doing to bring in more electrification to these different communities?
Well, Vernon, we have been involved in this challenge over a long period of time now, nearly 60 years. We'll be celebrating our 60th year of service this year. But I think that the challenge now is different than it was even 15 years ago, principally because a lot of the massive electrification efforts that were needed to increase access to electricity, I wouldn't say that they've been completed, but in a lot of regions of the world, the job is nearly done. So what we've seen is a shift in technology, a shift in responsibility, and a shift in financing. So when I say a shift in technology, the early years of electrification were focused on expansion of grid resources. Central power grid, extend lines out to communities that don't have electricity. There were some extremely successful efforts that we happen to be a part of in Bangladesh, in the Philippines, and Central and South America that have largely run their course. What we see now is good part of sub-Saharan Africa that still has low levels of access, and those areas also have challenges with the reliability and the sustainability of the grid systems. So expanding access to the communities that don't have it will require a combination of some grid resources as well as off-grid, meaning solar home systems, use of solar diesel hybrids, and other renewable energy technologies. What we see as our role going forward is to, as we have done in the past, is to look for innovative approaches to address the needs for electrification, look for the financing mechanisms which are going to be necessary, because in large part the large donors have backed away from large infrastructure projects. So what we need to see is how to enable local communities to gain access to the finance that they need, and to have access to the technical expertise that they need to address their electrification challenges.
So you all provide the technical resources, NRECA. Now, NRECA was started in the 30s. Came under the New Deal to help electrify rural America. Okay, Franklin Delano Roosevelt. So it sounds like that has been extremely successful in providing electricity in the U.S. over years. And NRECA was formed and helped to take the resources from these 900 or so companies, cooperative companies, and help to electrify the world. Is that sort of a decent summary?
Well, I'd say that our program was established in the early 60s, partly at the request of the U.S. government to help form an electrification orientation for USAID, and then to apply the blueprint that was developed early on to establish national electrification programs. So that was done in a series of countries in the early days. These days, the USAID doesn't take an approach like that, right? The approach which is taken is much more on a global basis to define electrification strategies and plans, and then to work with the local governments and the multilateral development banks to marshal the financing necessary to finance electrification projects. So our role in that process is to provide the expertise for the planning process, and on a case-by-case basis to also manage electrification projects.
So the planning and implementation.
Yes.
Okay. That's the role of NRECA, because you all, since the 30s, have gotten this experience and this knowledge of how to provide electricity in rural areas. And so now you apply that to the rest of the world. So I've asked you once before, and I'm going to ask you again because, well, I just want to hear, how does your heart feel about the work that you have been able to do?
Well, I feel fortunate that I've had the opportunity to apply my knowledge and to use my capabilities in a way that has been beneficial to the communities that our program has served. I guess I know, my brothers and my associates, to finding something, a career that aligns with your intellectual interest and also aligns with what your heart wants. It's when that happens, it's quite magical. So I just feel extremely appreciative that I didn't have a plan when I started. I feel that I had just a beneficiary of dumb luck in finding something that I've been able to do and make a contribution. So I can't say that I can't imagine a career that could have been more satisfying than the one that I have. And it's not for everybody, but it just happens to be this way for me.
So you have been nominated and you will be inducted into the Cooperative Hall of Fame on October the 6th. So somebody else has seen and recommended you that all of the good work that you've done. And Dan, I sat on that selection committee and blown away with your resume, with your application. It's like, do you have any sense of how many communities you have been able to touch, or your team has been able to touch, and then take that down to how many households or how many people that your life's work has touched and improved and helped in all of the different ways that you've talked about here?
Well, I guess what I'll share with you and with the audience is that one person alone doesn't make big contributions. I think one of the things I'm just forever thankful for are the colleagues that I've worked with. I think our team has had the opportunities. We've also had the benefit of a lot of different skill sets that together have made significant contributions. And some of the individuals who I've worked with are extremely talented and very dedicated. All of them, work very long hours. And we've also had the benefit of U.S. government funding, which can't be discounted. So yes, I think that my career has been successful, but the impact that my career has had it's not just due to my contributions. It's due to a team of talented, dedicated professionals and very talented and dedicated counterparts. We have played what I see as a significant role, but we've done so by helping others, the communities themselves and the electrification institutions who we work with, to make those contributions to realize real change.
And it's always interesting to me, and one of the conclusions that I've drawn in talking to people, particularly Co-op Hall of Famers, is that it takes a group. You talk about it takes a village to raise a child. It takes a village or a group to get anything accomplished. So you and your team, you and the team around you, have done a whole lot of work. And it sounds like to me, in reading your bio and your application, that you got the education, the formal education in terms of engineering, and you stumbled upon, with your professor's help, this whole co-op world. So Dan, I take my hat out to you, and it sounds like, and I would like one day, maybe if you would take a 5, 10, 20 hour or two and say, we've done 250 projects. There's so many households, like in that first one, there was 1,000 households, 4,000 people. If you could add up how many households and how many people, and then it doubled to 2,000 households, maybe 8,000 people, that you have been able to touch in a significant way. And I just applaud you for it, sir. Just applaud you for it.
Thank you very much. I guess what I'd say is that cumulatively over the length of the NRECA program, the number that we use right now is about 180 million people that the program has benefited.
We got
remarkable.
We got to lead with 180 million people, and it's extremely remarkable. Thank you, Dan, so very much for being on the show and for your life's work. We really appreciate you.
All
right. Everybody out there, we'll see you next Thursday. Please live cooperatively.
1450 WOL, where information is power.